Hi, and let's continue our discussion from the last lecture. And what we are discussing is we are interested in the time of transition of this population between these two different distributions. In the first distribution, we are looking at this leading edge, and what we are interested in is the transition of the population from this on this fitness scale from this picture to this picture. And we know that the total amount of time that it takes to transition from this picture to this picture is equal to q times tau, because this leading edge will take tau amounts of time for each of these steps, and there are q such beneficial mutations that distinguish the leading edge from the mean of the population at any given instant. Hence, it will need q of these transitions, hence the total time is q times tau. Now, how do we come up with an expression for this growth of the numbers which are associated with this leading edge, such that it becomes the most frequent distribution, most frequent genotype in the population? And the way we are going to think about this is that we know that this leading edge relative to the mean fitness, the leading edge or let me call this the leading edge at this particular instant, but let me call this genotype A, because after tau units this A genotype will no longer be the leading edge, and this particular genotype will be the leading edge. So, this will not be the leading edge for all time, but let us call this genotype A, which happens to be the leading edge when this particular snapshot is taken. So, the leading edge at this instant which is genotype A is growing at a rate which relative to the mean is Qs, is fitter than the mean by a quantity Qs. That means relative to the mean its numbers are increasing in the following manner: e to the power Qs, and that happens for time tau while the leading edge or the genotype A is still the leading edge. After time tau, this genotype A is no longer the leading edge, but it becomes, in this distribution it becomes second now, this genotype A. While this new beneficial mutation has become established in the population, the mean of the population, the mean fitness has also moved from this particular genotype to this particular genotype. So, when this has become established, because the wave is moving towards the right at a constant speed, the new mean fitness of the population is being defined by this particular genotype. That means the distance between genotype A and this new mean is no longer Qs units in fitness, but Q minus 1 units, because genotype A has remained where it was, but the mean has moved up S units. That means that the distance, the relative advantage of genotype A over the mean has now become reduced by S units, and the new advantage that this genotype A holds over the mean is Q minus 1 S units. So, it remains as a leading edge for time tau. So, this is one. The second, for next time tau, the genotype A has an advantage of Q minus 1 times S fitness units over the mean, which means that for this next tau units of time, its numbers are going to grow as e to the power q minus 1 s into tau. Similarly, what has happened in this next tau interval is that now another beneficial mutation has become established in the population, and all the while these mutations are becoming established, the numbers associated with genotype A are being increased because of selection. But when this has become established, now the mean has moved up another s units, and this red line represents the new mean, and the distance between genotype A and the new mean is now q minus 2 times s, and so on and so forth. This will keep on happening till our genotype A itself becomes the mean, and once genotype A itself becomes the mean as shown in this picture, what happens is that the relative advantage will become q minus q times s, and its numbers will stop growing. After this, the wave would have moved to the right, and this genotype A would be less fit than the mean fitness of the environment, and hence its numbers will start to drop. So, this is that instant where numbers associated with this genotype A are maximum. And what that means is, to come from this picture to this picture, we need to take q such steps. At each of those q steps, in the first step, the numbers of genotype A grow as qs, e to the power qs. In the second step, the numbers of genotype A grow as q minus 1 into e to the power q minus 1 s, and so on and so forth. So, we can summarize this as for the first tau interval of time tau, the numbers associated with genotype A grow as e to the power qs tau. For the second tau, the numbers grow as e to the power q minus 1 s tau, and so on and so forth. For the qth interval, the numbers will grow as e to the power s tau, 1 s tau. And each of these tau intervals characterizes the exact location of genotype A with respect to the mean fitness of the environment at that particular instant. So, this is equal to a total of q tau time, because these are q intervals each of time tau, and in this total time of q tau is divided between these q intervals, where growth is happening at a different rate as described by these formula. And the simplifying assumption that we are going to make here is the following, that the fastest rate of the genotype A is occurring when it itself is at the leading edge, and that fastest rate is e to the power qs tau. So, the exponent here is qs. The exponent in the second interval is q minus 1 times s, and so on and so forth, coming all the way down to s. And what we are going to say is that for each of these q intervals, the mean advantage of genotype A is equal to q divided by 2s. Okay. So, in the first interval, the advantage that genotype A had over the mean was qs. In the second interval, the advantage that genotype A over the mean was q minus 1s, and so on and so forth, coming all the way down to 2s and then s, and finally it becomes 0. So, if we are taking all of these q intervals together, the mean advantage that this genotype A has had over the mean fitness of the culture in this entire interval of time can be approximated as simply qs by 2, which is just the mean associated with these q values. Again, this is an approximation that we have made in order to come up with an analytical expression which describes, but this is not too bad an approximation in the sense that we are only interested in order of magnitude estimates of speed of evolution associated with our experiment. So, we have this mean advantage which is QS divided by 2. So, mean advantage of genotype A is equal to QS by 2. And the next question is that how long does this mean advantage of this genotype persist for? How long does this mean advantage persist for, and that is just equal to Q times tau. Because if we revisit this, for first tau interval the advantage was Qs, for the second tau interval the advantage was Q minus 1s, and for the qth tau interval the advantage was just s. That means these, I can take the mean of these advantages as just the central value here, which is Qs by 2, and this mean advantage can be approximated to be had over the sum of this entire duration, which is just Q times tau time. So, which gives me this result that the leading edge of this culture can be approximated as this mean advantage of Qs by 2, which has persisted for Q tau amounts of time. So, if we work with these assumptions, how have number of individuals belonging to our genotype A change in this Q tau interval? That is the next question that we want to answer, that if this is the advantage that this leading edge or genotype A had over the mean over the entire interval, and this is the time interval for which this advantage persisted, what are its numbers after this interval of Q tau time has passed? And that can be approximated as number of individuals of genotype A is equal to n naught into e to the power Qs by 2 into the time. So, this is the advantage, the relative growth rate with respect to the mean, times the time for which this advantage persisted, which is just Q tau, and this is equal to something. And at this instant we do not know what that something is. N naught is the starting number of individuals which belong to genotype A, and that we can safely assume to be 1 upon Qs, because this is the number of individuals that we would need in that genotype A as leading edge before we can say that genotype A became established in the population. When the numbers of genotype A were less than this, then that particular genotype is still susceptible to genetic drift and it has not become established. But once the numbers reach 1 by Qs, that is when we say that it has become established. So, n naught is just 1 by Qs, and this expression in the exponent becomes e to the power Q square s by 2 into tau, and this is equal to something in the right hand side which we have not yet defined. But let us revisit this again. In our distribution, this is fitness and this is number of cells, and when genotype A has become the most frequent genotype in my distribution, what that means is that of the total, and I know that the total size of my population This experiment is being conducted in a setting where the total number of individuals in the population is always equal to n. Then I can say that when genotype A has become the most frequent individual in the population, at that time we can say that the number of individuals of this genotype A is of the order of n. Okay. This is again an approximation because we do not really know exactly how many individuals belong to that particular genotype at this instant, but a good approximation is that it is of the order of n. Now, that exact number could be n by 2, n by 3 or n by 4, but the answer we know is most likely of the order of n, and hence I am going to approximate this as 1 upon qs e to the power q square s by 2 times tau e equals n. Okay. So, this is the expression that I have right now. And again I solve this, what I am interested in from this expression is the value or the expression for tau in terms of n, s and q. So, I am going to rearrange these. So, I get this, so I get an expression that tau equals this expression, and if I do that, what I end up getting is just e to the power q square s by 2 into tau is equal to n q s. I take log on both sides, that gives me q square s by 2 into tau equals ln of n q s, or tau is just equal to 2 divided by q square s into ln of n q s. That is my second expression associated with the regime where mutations are happening rapidly, and I come up with an expression which estimates the value of tau in terms of my variable q. Again, q is somewhat arbitrarily assumed variable which defines that how far is the leading edge of this distribution that we have been talking about from the mean fitness at any given instant in time. So, this is one expression for tau which we have arrived at by looking at the distribution and calculating the time that it takes the leading edge to become the most frequent genotype in the population. In the last lecture, we had done the same exercise and come up with an expression for tau, where the approach there was calculating how long does it take for the leading edge to no longer be the leading edge and become next to the leading edge genotype in the distribution that we are interested in. So, using these two approaches, we have these two expressions for tau, and what we want to do together is now solve these two expressions together and come up with values of q and tau. So, again this is the expression that we had obtained in the last lecture, which was calculated using the logic that we were interested in the time it takes for the leading edge to no longer be the leading edge. And this is the expression for tau that we have derived in this one, which is derived using the logic that how long does it take for the leading edge to become the most frequent genotype. And now what we want to do is sort of work with both these expressions together, and solve for tau as well as q. Okay. We sort of have a good estimate for everything else, and we have two equations in two unknowns, and we can solve them together. Okay. And the easiest way to do that is let us equate these two values. We have each of these expressions is tau equals something, hence the two right hand sides of these two equations are also equal to each other. So, I am just going to write the right hand sides and then sort of simplify them and see how we can proceed towards solving for tau and q. If we do that, we get 2 divided by q square s times ln of n q s equal to 1 upon q s ln of q s by u. We can simplify this, we can drop this qs, this s gets cancelled, one of the q's get cancelled, and we eventually get q is equal to 2 ln of nqs divided by ln of qs by u. So, we have this expression in Q where we have gotten rid of our variable tau. We will say that we have reasonable estimates for S, N and U, hence Q is the only unknown in this variable. But you can't explicitly solve for Q in this expression because Q is occurring on the left hand side as well as right hand side. It is not trivial, you can't straight away solve for Q, and an equation like this can be solved iteratively. So, we will solve this iteratively for Q, and the scheme is that once we get Q, we can plug that Q back in an expression we have already derived and get estimates of tau, and once we have tau, we will know the speed at which that wave is moving. So, let us try and look at how do we solve for this equation iteratively, and the approach that we are going to take is that we have q's. The problem with this equation is that we have q on both left hand side and right hand side, and there is no clear way to how to go about solving for q. So, the scheme that we are going to discuss is an iterative scheme where we guess values of q and consequently approach towards better values of q which better estimate which better reflect the accuracy associated with that relationship. So, let me just quickly talk about this. So, our expression is q equals 2 times ln of nqs divided by ln of qs by u, and to solve this iteratively, the first step that we will take is we will start with a guess value of q which is q naught. So, we just guess a value of q naught and that is our starting point. From there we get the next estimate of q as, which is the next estimate, I am going to call that as q1, and that q1 can be estimated as 2 times ln of n q naught s divided by ln of q naught s by u. So, what we are doing here is that we guess a value of q is which is equal to q naught, and we plug this guessed value of q naught only in the right hand side associated with the equation. Now, if the guessed value of q naught was 100% accurate, then what I should get on the right hand side should also be equal to q, which should be q naught. But because this was a guessed value, my left hand side will not be equal to q naught, but will be some other value of q, which let us say is equal to q1. So, I get q1 here, and now I have this q1. I am going to use q1 as next guess and get q2 equal to 2 times ln of n q1s divided by ln of q1s by u. So, what we have done here is that now the value that we arrived at using my initial guess q naught, that value was q1, and now I am going to use this next estimate of q1 as my guess value and arrive at the next estimate of q, which is q2, and I will keep on progressing like this to higher values of qi plus 1. Every estimate of qi gives me the next estimate of q, which is qi plus 1, and I will keep on doing this till I converge to a certain value of q, where between two successive iterations of the scheme between qi and qi plus 1, the change that has happened in the value of q is negligible, something that I am happy to ignore, and that is when I will say that the scheme has converged to a particular value of q, and that is the q that I am interested in. Now, these schemes can fail sometimes and not converge, so you just have to play around with the initial guess q naught that you are starting with, and hopefully one of those starting guesses will converge to the q value that we want to solve for in this equation. So, once we have this, the q value solved for using this iterative scheme, we plug this back in this expression that we had earlier derived for tau, and that gives me the time it takes. That's using, by plugging the q value that I have solved here, I can calculate the value of tau, and this tau gives me the value that the value of time that would take for the leading edge to no longer be the leading edge. And if I have that, now I have q, I already have n, u and s, those are values that I have fairly good estimates of depending on what kind of experiments I am doing, and I have solved for q and tau. Remember, now let us go back in our discussion and talk about what did we start with. We started with hoping to come up with an expression which tells me about speed of evolution in this experiment. So, having solved for all these quantities, I just want you to pause the video for a minute or so and think about what would that speed of evolution be in terms of everything that we have done so far. Now, we have solved for all the variables associated. Can we come up with an expression which tells me about the speed of evolution associated with this experiment? So, what you should think about, how you should think about this is the following, that what we are saying is that there is a travelling wave distribution, and at some time the wave maybe looks like this, and what we are saying is that in exactly tau times the wave moves up s units, which means after time tau the wave looks something like this. So, this corresponds to this corresponds to this. What we are saying that after time tau the wave has moved s units, which another way to think about this is that in time tau it is almost as if every individual in the population has increased its fitness by s units. Imagine this travelling wave imagine this travelling wave in a sense that everyone has jumped s units in this time tau. Now, what that means is, if we can think of this wave in these terms, that is every individual has increased its fitness by s units in time tau, what that means is that speed of evolution is just equal to s divided by tau, because in this tau interval the fitness increase in every individual is s. That means if increase in every individual's fitness is s, that means the increase in mean fitness is also equal to s. So, in time tau the mean fitness increase is equal to s, hence the speed of evolution can be estimated as s upon tau, and we have already solved for tau from the previous analysis that we just completed, and hence we have an expression for speed of evolution associated with this experiment. So, in this way this was involved work, but in this way we have been able to come up with a relatively simple expression for speed of evolution, making some huge approximations, but something that hopefully gives us a good handle of order of magnitude estimates of speed of evolutions associated with these simple microbial evolutionary experiments in lab. We will change gears in the next class, and we will talk about something called game theory and associated that with evolutionary dynamics. Thank you.